right, hey everybody. So yeah, my name is Eric Mack, and I've been a journalist for about a quarter century, which is a super crazy thing to hear come out of your own mouth. And come out of broadcast originally, and for about the first half of my career, did a lot of public radio stuff, NPR, and just generally talking at people like I'm doing now, and also going into rooms like this of people that are primarily smarter than me, and then trying to distill what they're all working on for a larger audience. Another project I did along the way was I helped crowdsource a science fiction novel, and this was back 5 or 6 years ago, before there was much Web3 or DAOs, and really wish I had had the tools we have today back then, because doing this in a Facebook group and on a Google Doc was a bit of a nightmare. So, but what I'm really interested in after going down the DAO rabbit hole over the last not even a year is that I began to realize that in addition to helping to crowdsource science fiction, it stands to be able to fix a lot of the problems with journalism that I think you'll probably recognize from this list. We all know what clickbait is and some of the flawed incentive structures involved in journalism. News deserts, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that term, but at the moment you could drive from where I live in Taos, New Mexico, and if you were to drive due east towards the Oklahoma Panhandle, you would drive for hours, go through several small communities. None of those communities have a local news source right now. They used to within the last 20 years, and about a half a dozen of them have closed. So a lot of problems with journalism, but I also do think that there is a lot of potential, and so just a disclaimer that the rest of this presentation presumes that this potential is actually real. We could debate problems in journalism for a long time, and that's because earnestly I've seen the power of journalism. I've seen it realized, during my own career, and what's even more eye-opening is when you leave and you go to a place, other places around the world, where this potential really isn't there, and it's very different. So I'm very interested in how Web3 can achieve these things and maybe go even further. That said, this is not a roadmap. Instead, I look at this as building up 4 pillars of what Web3 journalism could be. So these are basically the 4 best ideas I feel like I've come across. Not necessarily my ideas, but putting kind of a journalism and news spin on them. So number 1, something we're all familiar with and all struggling with, if you're in a DAO particularly, is onboarding. Web3 and traditional journalism, I feel like, really need to get to know each other. I've been hanging out in DAOs for several months now and keep looking around for other journalists, and there are not many are showing up. And I mean, I think this is a real problem because most people outside of this conference don't necessarily get what's going on. And in particular, a lot of journalists don't get it. And I think that's a real problem, and it's bad for everyone, and something that I think we can help fix. There are some places starting up where you can begin to find Web3 literate journalists and media folks. One is one I'm involved with called JournoDAO, which is really just a discussion group right now of a couple dozen journalists and media people. Bankless DAO, I think, is an onboarding system for a lot of people into Web3. And then also another one I'm involved with is called DAO Planet. And that's a social DAO that's actually putting on DAO Denver down the road later this week. So that's a simple one. Pillar number 2, I think, is the more important thing that we can get into, and that's to move media from an extractive to an expansive ecosystem. And so what do I mean by that? Well, first, let's go into how Web 2 journalism works. This is all going to be pretty familiar to you, I think. Let's start with social content on Web 2 platforms. Your social content does have value sometimes, not all of it. But the thing is, all of it is completely harvested, all of that value, by Web 2 platforms that we post to and by reporters like me who make a living off of it. So here's an example. I mean, I'm not talking about Elon Musk. Elon Musk wants his stuff on Twitter. It's what he uses instead of a marketing department. But here's something else. This is some footage of Comet Leonard from December. This was captured by an amateur astronomer using some pretty expensive equipment. And this is the kind of thing I cover. I cover a lot of space and astronomy. And I was writing about Comet Leonard, and I grabbed this tweet, and it went into the story. And now, I mean, I happen to know that Dr. Janetta was, pretty excited to have that up in my story. But the thing is, she didn't get paid for it. Twitter did, and I did. And something just feels a little bit off about that. So to break it down a little further, let's talk about how value flows in the different mediums that we're familiar with. So Web 1, the value flows from publisher to the reader in terms of immediate access to information. This has been this way for 30 years now. And then value flows back from the reader to the publisher in terms of subscription revenue and eyeballs to sell to advertisers. Now what changed with Web 2 is that you still got the value flowing from publisher to reader in terms of that access to information, but now the reader is getting an extra platform, an audience, and that hit of dopamine that we're probably all familiar with from getting a like or a retweet or whatever acknowledgement of your humanity. And then the other way, Web 2 value flows back from the reader to the publisher in terms of not just the eyeballs, but also all sorts of personal data that the platforms can sell to advertisers. So here's where we are. In Web 3, the opportunity is that the value can flow from the publisher to the reader in terms of contribution to the creation of valuable content, and from the reader to the publisher in terms of contributions to the creation of valuable content. Seems a little different. So to sum that up another way, in the old model, eyeballs and attention are converted to fiat via advertising to fund the creation of content to attract more eyeballs and attention and generate profits. It's been going on for generations. But in the new model, engagement drives the creation of content, and that drives more engagement, generating value for the public good, that same circle from the last slide, in the process. And this engagement and creation can be moderated, measured, and facilitated through tokens and smart contracts. This is, we're seeing this stuff among creative communities, and this is really just kind of taking what's been working for artists over the last couple of years and seeing if we can make it work for journalism as well. So put it another way, media tokens can create a community for journalists and their audience, and Web3 tools can build a new economy for citizen journalism. So instead of grinding on Axie Infinity to earn a couple of tokens, you could be going out and contributing to what's going on, documenting what's going on in your local community, and helping spread the word of that, and keeping civic engagement where it should be. Oops. So the point is that with Web3, we can be expansive rather than extractive. Web3 is the potential of citizen journalism recognized and civic life revitalized, as I was saying. Okay, so third of 4 pillars. I would love to see information put on chain to truly unlock its power. And I think some folks here might be familiar with this one. Kind of a basic experiment the Associated Press has worked with putting facts on chain using Chainlink. They put election results on there, and that was used to settle prediction markets back in 2020. A couple of other experiments that are underway or have been tried that I've kind of been drawing inspiration from. Poet, you may remember, was an attempt to put, among the many things it could do, like journalists and writers could put their actual portfolio on the blockchain. Ocean Protocol, of course, is doing some really cool stuff with tokenizing data and access to it. And I'm pretty sure there's some folks from the decentralized science movement here who are a little bit further along in building these kind of things that I'm talking about in terms of making actual facts and data available on blockchain. So a couple other applications of having this stuff on chain for journalists. It makes it potentially much easier to facilitate interacting with anonymous sources. And also, I don't know if before COVID, we were freaking out a lot more about deepfakes. I don't think that the potential for problems there has gone away. But I mean, I would love to see can we like take an actual original video of an interview, put that on IPFS or something, token gate it with a multi-sig, and then you have the you can authenticate the original version. I feel like this is a bounty that somebody should be looking at. Another possible use for journalists of putting this stuff on chain, when you write a story on a Web2 platform, that thing is likely to get changed, updated, corrected several times. A little insight behind the curtain. A lot of my stories, maybe one or two people will edit them. The headline will get edited about 8 to 9 to a dozen times. So if we could have an immutable record of everything that happens to a story, every update, every correction, I think it'll go a long way in regaining the trust of the public in terms of for journalists, and also increasing that transparency that I think is essential. Oops, wrong way. Now we're going the other direction. Okay, another thing, so in that discussion group, JournoDAO that I mentioned, we were starting to talk about the potential of blockchain for journalism, and immediately everyone went here. Not long after Constitution DAO. Why not? We can join Jeff Bezos and buy some struggling local newspapers, or maybe restart the ones that have shut down, like on that drive to Oklahoma I mentioned earlier. So, but why would we go ahead and do this? Well, I mean, I think some DAOs want to use democratic means to buy cool stuff and preserve it, Constitution, whatever, but it would also be cool to use, it would also be cool to buy these struggling local institutions that help actually preserve democracy. I could see this as an experiment with being able to break away from the advertising business model, finally, if journalists, Web3 native journalists were to actually own a local outlet, and also an opportunity to pay journalists what they're worth and give them the means to actually do right by their communities in terms of having the resources to do the reporting that a local community actually deserves. And so if you were to put these 4 pillars together, and this is kind of the very long view of where I think this could all be going, if we can dial in onboarding, a model that focuses on expansion over extraction of value, getting some facts on chain, and then maybe going shopping for a few outlets. With all those things working together, this leads us inevitably, I think, to DAOs as the new wire service. And there's some of the larger DAOs, like when you're out, if you operate in Bankless at all, it's just this kind of large, sprawling thing with people from all over the world. And one day I was like, if all these people were actually journalists, it's a wire service right there. And I think we have a better grasp on what's going on in our world. But this process could be a straight line or not. There's a reason it's pillars and not a roadmap. I think these things can be built up in sequence or in parallel, and I'm really curious to see who steps up to do it first. This is the community that I'm a part of, and this is me. And if there's any time left for questions, it looks like I got about 5 or 6 minutes.